This is part 2 of the series of Li Lu answering questions from Chinese value investors on April 6. This built upon his sharing last year at Peking University and on part 1 of the series where he discusses the bottlenecks in China. In this episode, Li Lu is responding to U.S. trade war in transitioning to a new world order. Note that this is a translated version of Chinese transcript. If you enjoy this, please subscribe and like the video so it can be shared with more people. What impact does U.S. raising tariffs have on China and the rest of the world? Li Lu, the immediate effect of a trade war is that the U.S. effectively imposes a consumption tax on all imported goods. In response, other countries retaliate by raising tariffs on American exports, also a form of consumption tax. As trade protectionism spreads, countries begin imposing tariffs on one another more broadly, raising the cost of traded goods across the board. The result is deflationary pressure on both consumption and the global economy. But beyond these direct effects, the more profound consequence is a shift in the world order. The current global structure rests on 3 main pillars under U.S. leadership. First, a values-based ideology rooted in universal principles. Second, a rules-based system of free trade and open global markets. And third, America's own hard power. Trump's policies on issues like Russia and Ukraine, along with the broader trade war, have shaken the first 2 pillars and exposed vulnerabilities in the third. Take the free trade system, for example. The U.S.'s unilateral tariffs have created deep uncertainty about the integrity of global trade rules. These actions violate WTO rules, leaving the organization looking increasingly irrelevant. But rules only matter when there's the power to enforce them. In the past, the U.S. both had that power and was willing to use it. Now, as the U.S. steps back, institutions like the WTO lose their anchor. Suddenly, global norms feel less important and the entire structure starts to drift. On the issue of power, the U.S. dollar and dollar-based assets have long been the bedrock of global finance. But today, U.S. federal debt has surpassed 100% of GDP. In recent years, the government has added $2 trillion in new debt annually, much of it in short-term instruments. This year alone, the U.S. needs to refinance or issue $10 to $11 trillion in debt, a large share of which relies on foreign capital. Yet launching trade wars against nearly every country has made foreign investors more hesitant to hold U.S. assets. So cracks have appeared in all 3 pillars of the current world order. Other countries may not see it as a condemned building just yet, but they've clearly started to question its reliability and are quietly searching for alternatives. The transition has already begun. The old order is fading, and a new one is slowly taking shape. No one yet knows what this new order will look like, but the shift is irreversible. For China, as a major economy, a response is inevitable. It will first retaliate, then negotiate. Regardless of how things end, both imports and exports between China and the U.S. will face higher tariffs, and total trade volume will decline. Much of the goods that can't be sold abroad will either need to find demand domestically or go to waste. That's the first and most visible layer of impact. Looking further ahead, this trade war may accelerate China's transition from an export and investment-driven economy to one led by domestic consumption. This shift has been underway for some time, but it has gained momentum since last September and may speed up even more in the future. As the world's largest unified market, China has the capacity to build a growth model centered on domestic demand. Compared to the U.S., where consumption exceeds production and spending outpaces saving, China's economy produces more than it consumes and saves more than it invests. In some ways, that makes its structural challenges easier to solve. As I've mentioned before, China still has a lot of untapped reform potential. For instance, by using market mechanisms to improve its social safety net and leveraging Hong Kong's capital markets more effectively, China can turn more of its savings into consumption. That consumption can then flow into the real economy, fuel business profits, translate into shareholder value, grow personal wealth, and support the next cycle of consumption. Over time, the savings rate will fall, wealth will rise, consumption will grow, companies will become stronger, and the economy will enter a virtuous cycle. As the global order shifts, China has a rare opportunity to reshape its external environment. Different responses will lead to very different outcomes, making this a critical moment for true diplomatic thinking, strategy, and tactics. We often talk about China's untapped potential for reform, and the same holds true on the international stage. Trump's actions have shaken the foundations of the existing global order. This gives China a chance to define its position within the evolving global landscape. For example, the global wave of tariffs and retaliatory measures could trigger a deflationary race to the bottom. In China, there's been much talk in recent years of involution, which in essence refers to intensified competition under deflationary pressure. This new round of tariffs, whether initiated or retaliatory, is effectively a synchronized global consumption tax. As consumption shrinks, deflationary forces intensify, leading to a kind of global involution where nations dump goods on each other in a classic prisoner's dilemma: if I think others will do it, I must do it too. The resulting spiral of competitive tariff increases could lead to a deflationary trap unless some external force intervenes. In such a deflationary environment, competition naturally forces action. If you don't move, someone else will, and once someone does, you must follow. That's why the choices China makes now are crucial. This moment gives China the chance to secure a more favorable position in the reshaping of the global order. China may have several paths to choose from. 1. Engage in escalating cycles of retaliatory tariffs, a self-reinforcing downward spiral with no clear end. Secondly, negotiate with the U.S. bilaterally to reach a deal, likely with high tariffs still in place, while maintaining full compliance with existing WTO rules in dealings with all other countries, even if others fail to do the same. Thirdly, declare adherence to all existing tariff agreements, including WTO rules and any new agreements with the U.S. Then, go further by deepening regional free trade efforts already underway, most notably the 10+3 framework of ASEAN plus China, Japan, and South Korea. The aim would be to build a free trade zone rooted in shared culture, history, and values, a trade union among East and Southeast Asian nations built on more than just economic interests. Of course, these are all export-oriented economies. So this effort must be tied to growing domestic demand, which represents new incremental growth. China could unilaterally adopt a policy of WTO minus the US, continue its retaliatory stance against the US, but uphold WTO norms with others and deepen integration within the East and Southeast Asian region. This would allow China to shift some of the lost US trade toward regional partners while unlocking its own domestic consumption. The increase in internal demand could more than offset the loss in external trade. As that domestic demand grows, China could share some of the growth dividends with its regional partners, building a new economic framework even more advanced than the WTO. Over time, this regional model could radiate outward, attracting interest from Europe and gradually evolving into a global force. In fact, China's connections with its neighboring countries, through cultural tradition, economic coordination, moral values, and behavioral norms, are deeper and more enduring than purely institutional ties. These soft connections have long been underappreciated in the Western-led international system. Historical issues, particularly between China and Japan, have been hard to overcome. But now is the time to shift thinking and rebuild a regional economic system centered around China, Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN. This new WTO minus the US model, especially with eventual European participation, could become a powerful force. As the global system shifts from a unipolar to a multipolar world, there is a need to construct a new type of international relationship based on cultural, geographic, and commercial ties rather than military alliances. This new cooperative framework would be geared toward mutual economic benefit and enforceable trade norms, not ideological alignment or political control. In this transition, China faces two possible outcomes. It could fall into the same prisoner's dilemma as other countries and end up in a stalemate. Or it could achieve a dual breakthrough, first, by escaping the long-standing trap of geopolitical rivalry, and second, by emerging as a leading pole in a multipolar world, one not defined by ideology or political systems, but by shared cultural identity, economic interest, and free trade. If realized, this new global structure could deliver enormous external policy dividends for China. Most importantly, China can actively choose how to pursue these outcomes. Once a new economic order is established, concerns over technological choke points or supply chain disruptions may no longer be as pressing.